the occasion of celebrating the Human Rights Day, we're decided to talk about the state of human rights in Mongolia with the UN Resident Coordinator in Mongolia, Mr. Tapan Mishra. Thank you for joining us today.
Baitla, thank you for inviting me.
Sure.
It's a pleasure to be here in MNB World.
For the second time.
For the second time.
Right.
This year, on the occasion of the Human Rights Day. I also want to take this opportunity to congratulate MNB World, which will be completing its second year and anniversary on the 20th of December.
Thank you very much.
So wish you all the very best. Sansakni Hosi.
Thank you very much. Okay, let's talk about again this Human Rights Day celebration. So how do you celebrate this day?
As you know, on the 10th of December 1948, the Charter was adopted in terms of the Human Rights Convention. So this is a global effort led by the High Commissioner for Human Rights in Geneva. We reach out to all our constituents from the government of Mongolia to all the other partners in the National Human Rights Commission, with the members of parliament, with ministers, with the civil society, with academics. We yesterday had a global online meeting, including in Mongolia, where with the Speaker of Mongolia, His Excellency Mr. Zandan Chatar, the human rights champion, human rights defenders champion, and the former Minister of Foreign Affairs and current Member of Parliament, Mr. Sogbatar, the Minister for Labour and Social Protection, Arunzaya Ayush, and the current acting Chief Commissioner of the National Human Rights Commission, the Hunan. We in the UN Resident Coordinator's Office, along with all UN country team members, joined the online discussion. We discussed with all the civil society, with the academics, including students. There was a 15-year-old student who asked questions about how education. So we had a very good discussion, engaging everybody around the human rights situation in Mongolia, in this pandemic situation, in the human rights defenders issue, and also the legal issues that needs to be addressed. So it was that's how we celebrated Human Rights Day. We also made statements to the media, to the press, and also made sure that we as the United Nations stand neutral to support the government of Mongolia to ensure that human rights are protected and safeguarded for all Mongolian citizens and all citizens all over the world.
Okay. We started from talking about the state of human rights. So what is the current situation? What is the current state of human rights in Mongolia?
Mongolia has been a very strong supporter of human rights. It has signed all the relevant conventions. It has been actively responding to the Human Rights Commission in terms of the Universal Periodic Review, which is a review of all countries together. So we just had in November the third cycle, where more than 300 recommendations are made. In the previous cycles, Mongolia has taken very strongly the issue of implementation of that. There are some very positive strides Mongolia has made in terms of implementing those human rights recommendations, including abolition of the capital punishment or that penalty, also the issues of torture, issues of the human rights defenders. As I mentioned, the human rights defenders law has been placed before the parliament. Hopefully, when that gets passed, Mongolia will be the first country in the region to have done that, which is a very strong symbol of how committed Mongolia is towards human rights. Although I would say that not everything is absolutely perfect in today's world with the situation of the pandemic. We have been affected after strong measures being taken for the last 8-9 months. We had no case which is locally transmitted, but there was some issues where in the last 1 month we had some issues. Therefore, the measures were strengthened and there has been some lockdowns. And I believe one of the issues that has been a strong problem in Mongolia is about the gender-based violence or domestic violence, violence against women and children and other vulnerable groups. That is a violation of human rights. The other issue that has been happening is about stigma and discrimination, especially against Mongolian, the COVID patients. There is a recent case that we heard that neighbors did not allow the children of a mother who was infected by COVID to come back and stay in the home. Now that is again a violation of how you, and again the government, and they were taken to a safety home, the one-stop center to stay there. But this is where not only the government, so government certainly has the most important overall responsibility and accountability, but every player, including the citizens of Mongolia, the civil society, and everybody else, including international partners, need to work together to safeguard against any violation of human rights. So overall, I think it's a very positive situation, but there's a lot more we can do to really ensure human rights for all Mongolian citizens equitably, in an inclusive manner, so that they can enjoy their freedoms and rights in the best possible way, following the rule of law, following the overall safety and security measures in this special pandemic.
Yes, and we live in a very difficult times when COVID-19 is really widespread. So what do you think? How has the COVID-19 pandemic been detrimental to human rights in Mongolia?
Certainly, as you know, the first right is our right to life, and that needs to be protected most importantly. This pandemic has shown that countries, regardless how rich or poor they are, whether it's the United States of America or Europe or other countries, they have got equally. The virus does not discriminate against any economic characters or any other characteristic. It can happen to anybody and anywhere, so we need to be very strongly safeguarding the lives of people. So that's the government of Mongolia, I must say, has done a great job in terms of safeguarding that right from its inception, from end of January, early February, to protect the people as well, and we've been quite good in terms of safeguarding them, including bringing back Mongolian standard outside. And there's a lot, already 26,000 people have been brought in, but there are many more people who are waiting to come back. And I must say that these are measures that in the COVID situation, we have to balance everything. The freedom of right and expression is there. Mongolia is very strong in terms of media, social media and expressions compared to many other countries. But again, at the same time, some of these impositions that come with the lockdown, where people's freedom of movement is being restricted, the freedom of going to schools and going to workplace and going to other public gatherings is being restricted.
Selling some products, some kind of products also.
Sure, and therefore, yes, alcohol is a big requirement for Mongolia, especially because in the winter and the cold, and that. But again, I would say that these are measures that need to be taken in balance to make sure that overall human rights and human dignity is protected and prevented. At the same time, because of the confinement in the homes, children not going to the schools, they have been, I'm sure there's a lot of unrest and protests that must be there broiling. But if we look at the larger picture, that in the current situation, any pandemic, any countries, you've seen countries, as I said, in the US and Europe, there are lockdowns in every country. There are lockdowns in every situation emerging where there was a huge number of cases happening or deaths happening.
What do you think, in what part of human rights should the Mongolian government pay attention, should tackle as the most urgent?
Sure. In terms of the priorities of Mongolian situation, first of all, the most important, as I said, is life and health. So important to protect people's lives and health, and that's where the priority needs to be given, health and life first. Second, the humanitarian situation. The people who are suffering from a situation where their existence or survival is at stake, and people who have especially the most vulnerable, as I said, women, children, disabled, elderly, how to make sure that they are protected, and how to make sure that nobody suffers to the extent that there's a risk of death or any major situation. And third is the socio-economic impact. The people are losing jobs, they're losing livelihoods, they're losing their economic well-being. So we need to support that as well. And that recovery will take some time, but it needs to be planned, inclusive, and therefore all partners, including led by the government of Mongolia, but supported by all international and national and partners in governments and private sector, needs to join hands together to overcome that. And in that, the rights and freedoms, both the, as I said, the basic to life, to health, again, also to socioeconomic livelihoods, all that needs to be protected, including with children's education, including with health access, including safe and free drinking water and other food, access to food and other aspects need to be protected. One other thing that Mongolia is focusing on is the human rights defenders, where in Mongolia the human rights defenders law is being put up. It's been going on very strongly with the members of parliament, and I mentioned earlier that previous Minister of Foreign Affairs and current MP Tsogbathar has been championing that, along with the Human Rights Commission and the other stakeholders, and hopefully that will give Mongolia a much stronger push towards ensuring human rights for all, including people whose land rights, whose access to water and access to other basic rights, against journalists, issues of stigma and discrimination, all the issues where we need to stand up for will be protected, and human rights defenders is an important priority that Mongolia needs to also prioritize, in addition to making people safe, and safety, health and well-being of people is protected.
Okay. But what about you, I mean the United Nations? So are you optimistic in the way human rights have been developing over the last decade?
Globally or in Mongolia?
In Mongolia.
Okay. So in Mongolia, I must say that ever since, first of all, I'm an eternal optimist. I'm always looking at positives coming up. I always believe that human potential and human capacity is there to make our worlds better. And more so if you all work together, led by the government of Mongolia, in the way to make a very inclusive and sustainable development for all. End of the day, everybody wants to enjoy a good life, which is with dignity and pride and respect, which is enshrined in the Charter of the Human Rights. So Mongolia certainly has made great progress in that. In terms of the situation of Mongolia currently, given the fact that in a market economy, we have dependence to the market forces around us, our dependence to countries which are neighboring countries like China and Russia in terms of the economic situation. We are trying in Mongolia from the UN to work closely with the government to ensure that all the rights and freedoms of people are protected, but at the same time, we also make an inclusive and sustainable development plan towards the achievement of Vision 2050 for Mongolia, which is aligned to the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, or the Agenda 2030, to include everybody. But the core and center and the heart of that development plan should be human rights, that is protected. So overall, I'm very optimistic. I feel that there is a lot of positive progress, and there is much more positive opportunities to make Mongolia really a front runner as a country, which is able to have inclusive and sustainable development, protecting human rights for all citizens equitably, with dignity and pride and respect. And I would also like to appeal to all Mongolian citizens to work together to ensure that they also not only enjoy their rights, but also do their obligations. And there are things that we can do together to balance out how we protect human rights for all in Mongolia.
We talk about human rights a lot and about the concept itself. So, but it's obviously that we think that any change comes from the government, right? But what about as the ordinary people? What should we do to make any change, any difference, to the human rights?
That's a very good question, Susanna. I think, yes, the government is the flag bearer of the human rights in the country. They have the ultimate responsibility and accountability to make it happen by policy making, by making laws, by implementing that equitably and for all. At the same time, there are other actors who need to work with the government, including, most importantly, the people, the citizens, that along with rights comes responsibilities, duties and obligations. So for instance, as I give you an example, even if the restrictions are happening, in my own home, as I can enjoy my human right of doing anything, my expression.
Right.
But if I express myself through violence, that is unfair to somebody else who is the victim of violence, whether it's a woman or a child or any elderly or a disabled. So I need to do my part as a citizen of Mongolia to be able to not only protect my rights and to enjoy my rights, but to enable other people to enjoy their rights as well. So everybody. So therefore, the people and citizens of Mongolia, the civil society, the government, the international organizations, NGOs, everybody who's working towards preventing and protecting human rights. But if there are violations, there has to be action taken. The government will need to also ensure that the rule of law is implemented equitably and fairly to all. If there are violations, there has to be a strong action taken against, so that not only it is an action against the person who perpetrator, but supporting also the victims and ensuring that we can prevent any such violation. The ideal situation would be that we prevent any such violation and we protect these rights for everybody. So
how should we prevent them?
So the first thing is about awareness. People should be aware what their rights are and what other people's rights are. So these rights, the more awareness we have, the better. So just because I have physical power doesn't mean I have a right to hit anybody else or abuse anybody else.
Yeah.
Just because I have a right doesn't supersede the right of somebody else. So that understanding and awareness, so what are the rights, whether rights of expression, whether rights of demonstration, rights of movement, all these rights need to be understood. So the first thing, people need to be more aware. And I think in the UN we are trying to create, as I said, like in the online discussions yesterday, we had more than 150 people, and we were also almost talking for about 5 hours together in terms of the discussions on how to understand your rights, how to prevent them, how to make sure that not only these are implemented through the government's legislation and implementation, but how we can take our own responsibility of standing up, abiding by the rule of law, and doing things which not only protect the rights for myself, but also for others.
My last question will be about maybe your personal point of view. So how do you see, what is the biggest problem in Mongolia within the frame of human rights? Let's talk about the human trafficking. So it is a very big problem, right? So what do you think, what should Mongolian government should do to handle this problem?
Very good question on the issue of trafficking. One of our UN agencies, IOM, works very closely with the government, and especially we have noticed that especially in migrants. Now currently, because of the restriction of movement, international trafficking has reduced because of the opportunity to. But again, we have noticed that many Mongolian citizens who are stranded overseas with a lack of jobs, etc., have been victims of trafficking. But also nationally in the country, we need to be aware. And a lot of times, even girls and children and women are not aware how trafficking can happen. So to prevent such trafficking, awareness is very important. Right. How to protect and prevent themselves from happening. At the same time, we need to be very closely working with the government and the rule of law, that anything that's happening on traffickers are dealt very strongly, and it is not tolerated at all in any way, and we take strongest action against such trafficking incidents. We have access to data, we have access to information. We need to make sure that that all the trafficking trends are curtailed, and I'm happy to say that the UN through IOM is working closely with the government to ensure that we tackle as best as we can the scourge and the bad practice of trafficking.
Okay. Thank you very much for your interview. It was very interesting, and we wish you all the best, and we hope that the value of human rights will be expanded more. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Susanna. If I may say a last word about the human rights dimension on this special day, thank you for MNB World for inviting me for this talk with you, which is always a pleasant occasion. But I just want to leave this message for all Mongolian citizens.
Sure.
The fact that human rights is a fundamental human right is the core of the Sustainable Development Goals. It is an integral part of every human citizen to enjoy those rights, and I would like to stand up, that we all need to stand up against any human rights violation. We need to stand up to protect those rights for ourselves and for others, and we all have a role, starting with the government of Mongolia and every citizen and every civil society and every other actor. So I wish you all the best. Sansakni Hosi, Baitla.
Thank you very much. Wish you all the best. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, so today we had talked about the state of human rights in Mongolia with UN Resident Coordinator in Mongolia, Mr. Tapan Mishra. We'll see you next time. Until that, please stay safe and stay at home. Thank you.